Welcome to the Stop Dieting podcast, hosted by best-selling, award-winning author and renowned weight loss expert, David Medansky. If you struggle to lose weight or you've lost weight and gained it back, you'll want to listen each week. Each week, you will learn tips for healthy weight loss without going on a diet, without having to follow an exercise program, without counting calories, or having to purchase special meals or products. The Stop Dieting podcast is more than just about healthy and sustainable weight loss. You will also learn how you can have more energy, feel better, get rid of brain fog, and improve your overall health. Stay tuned for another informative and insightful episode. And if you like what you hear, be sure to subscribe and share this with your friends.
Hi, welcome to another episode of Stop Dieting. I'm your host, David Medansky, and today we have a very special guest, Brooke Bownes. Is that pronounced correct?
Bownes, yeah.
Bownes, okay. Well, thanks for being with us today, Brooke. Tell us a little bit about your background and how you got into helping people with health and wellness.
Well, it's basically, I come from like a trauma background because I was born with a cord wrapped around my neck that caused complications at birth. And the doctor said I would probably never walk, and if I did, I would never run and ride a bike, but I did all three. So that was kind of like the start of my life. And then I had a very narcissistic mother. So I grew up feeling that I wasn't worthy of anything, and I didn't have any much self-love or self-esteem. And I was always self-sabotaging. I was a huge people pleaser. But I've worked through a lot of stuff and worked myself. And, I realized that the best thing I can do is care for me and look after me and heal me to help heal, the rest of the world. So I'm very much into helping people to care about themselves and putting themselves first and realizing that their feelings and their emotions are important.
Awesome. And you talk about the mother wound and trauma. Can you explain what you mean by that?
Yeah, the mother wound and trauma, I'm very passionate about raising awareness of it because a lot of people aren't aware of it. They just think, oh, well, that's just the way my mum was. But a mother wound is when your mother has internal child wounds that she hasn't healed from. And she can be physically there, but emotionally very, very, absent, and also very overcritical and very judgmental. So the children, often the daughters, get the brunt of it, but sometimes the sons, they end up being people pleasers, treading on eggshells and thinking, oh, well, that's the way I have to be to kind of like survive. And that's just the way my mother was. And that's just the way people in my family are. But they don't actually realize it's an actual thing that you can suffer from the mother wound, and it does have an effect on your life, and you end up either self-sabotaging, being a people pleaser, so not putting yourself first, not caring about your well-being because you grew up putting everybody else's feelings first because your feelings weren't ever considered as important or valid, because it's the mother, because she's had that inner child wound herself, she needed that fix to help herself to feel better. So putting you down as a child helped her to feel better and to get her fixed. So you grew up thinking, well, my feelings aren't important and validated. So, and the trauma that's involved in that, it can come out in all different ways when like people want to start a business, like being seen and being heard. Like, oh, I can't do that. Well, what will people think of me? That's a big thing that a lot of my clients say, well, I can't do that because what will people think? Because a mother, when she's got the mother wound, would say, oh, you can't do that as a child. What will people think? Because she worries more about what people think of her and whether they think she's a good enough parent rather than caring about what the child wants and the child needs.
So it's more of the emotional and psychological issues that are being projected by mother onto the child, and not so much physical, although I guess it could be physical also.
Yes, it could be physical also. They can be physically there, as in like with my mother always made sure that I was looked after. In fact, I always had nice clothes. I was always clean, that sort of thing, because she didn't want anybody to think that, we weren't a perfect family. But emotionally, and my mother was quite violent and she was quite abusive physically as well behind closed doors. But to the outside world, she wanted it to look like we were the perfect family because, again, it's their inner childhood wounds of not feeling good enough. My family doesn't look perfect to the outside world, then I can't be a good enough parent, and they can't deal with that sort of feeling because they've never dealt with their emotions and processed them and processed that trauma.
And how would you, how do you help people with, overcoming some of this, the mother wound and some of the emotional and psychological trauma experienced during childhood?
It's getting them to be aware of what's going on with their bodies, because what happens is we can logically know that we can do things like, for instance, doing a Facebook Live with people I work with in business. They want to do a Facebook Live. They know it'll help their business. They know they've got the knowledge and the skills to do it. But then they say, well, something keeps me stuck. And they often kind of like go to lean forward and like there's an invisible wall in front of them. And what's happened is they logically know they can do it, but their bodies are saying, no, we're not doing this, because the bodies are still reliving the trauma that happened in the past. And when your body relives that trauma and your nervous system is triggered, your body will react. So you may sort of like hold your breath, or your heartbeat may go faster. You may tense up, which sends a signal to your subconscious mind that there's danger about. Because if your heart's starting to race and you're starting to tense up, your subconscious mind is then thinking you're in that fight or flight, that you're either ready to fight something or you're ready to start running away from something. And we have 80% of the signal comes from our body to our mind, and only 20% comes from our minds to our bodies. So if our bodies aren't in line with what our mind's thinking, it won't happen, because we feel what we feel in our bodies and it sends a signal to our mind, and that's where we get stuck. So I help my clients to understand that, and we work through that and find out where their beliefs and their stories come from, because often the stories and beliefs that are running through their body and their mind are beliefs and stories from their parents and their grandparents, because trauma can go back like 7 generations. And when we if I say to a woman, look at what your mother did, how was she, and what did you learn from what you observed from her as a child, and what was your grandmother like, and looking back into it, and then they understand that it's beliefs that have been passed down. Because a lot of my clients say, well, that's just the way our family are, we've always been like that. It's letting them understand that they don't have to carry on being like that. They can be what they want to be, because those beliefs may have worked 3 or 4 generations ago for people in their family, but it doesn't mean to say it's working right now for the people right now. So having that understanding and awareness that they can actually realize that then beliefs that they're running in their mind aren't the beliefs that they actually want to have, and we can start working on changing those. And I use several different modalities to help unlock that trauma and to help them to heal, so they can go forward without their bodies reacting, so they can go and do what they want to do, without that fear of, oh my goodness, I'm in danger, when they're not actually in danger. It's just a perceived danger because of how their body's reacting.
That's fascinating. Listening to you talk, it reminds me of the pot roast story. I'm sure you've heard of it, but for the audience, it's where a lady is hosting a dinner party and she makes a pot roast. And one of the guests says, "This is delicious. Can I get the recipe?" And the host says, "Of course." And she writes it down and gives it to the guest. The guest looks it over and says, "Why do you cut the ends of the pot roast off?" And the host says, "I don't know. That's how my mom taught me." So the host is curious. She calls her mom the next day and says, "Mom, why do we cut the ends of the roast off before we cook it?" And her mom says, "I don't know. That's how your grandmother taught me. Call your grandmother." So she calls her grandmother, and the grandmother thinks for a minute and says, "Oh, because when I was first married, the pot I had to make the pot roast was too small. So I had to cut the ends off to make it fit." So a lot of times we do things without realizing, because that's how we're taught. And that sounds like it continues for generations with some of the mother trauma that you talk about.
Yeah, and it's comical that you actually bring up that story, because I wrote a book about self-sabotage, how to break through the self-sabotage cycle, and I actually quoted that story, sort of very similar, because it was Zig Ziglar that I got the story from, and it was the husband that was asking the wife, so it's slightly different connotation to it, but the same thing is like, we don't question things. If things have been done in our family for generations, oh well, that's just the way our family is, and that's just the way we have to carry on doing them. But when I actually say, actually, does that suit you? Is that aligned with you doing it? Well, no, but I feel I should, because it's a family tradition. And the minute I hear my clients say, well, I feel I should, it's like that's the guilt and the shame that comes in. Well, if I change it, I'm going to upset my mother, I'm going to upset my grandmother, I'm going to upset my father, whoever it is, but it doesn't have to stay that way. Just because your parents or your grandparents or your great grandparents did it, doesn't mean to say that you have to do it as well. But when they realize that, and that kind of light bulb moment happens, like, oh my goodness, so you mean I could do X, Y, Z instead? I'm like, yeah, if that's what makes you feel happy, yeah, absolutely.
But exactly, it's like some foods, what people eat, and it's, well, why are you eating those foods? Well, that's what I ate as a kid growing up, and that's, why, what's wrong with it? And it's because some parents thought that what they were giving their kids were healthy when it really wasn't. And so people think it's healthy when it's not, until they realize they're doing certain things. So yeah, that's interesting to start investigating and looking into why we do certain things and how we do certain things, and what we're doing, to see what we can do to improve. So you wrote, you're a #1 best-selling author, correct?
I am, yes.
And what's the title of your book again?
I've actually got two. One I collaborated with, and the title of the book I wrote on my own was "You Can Have It: How to Break Through the Self-Sabotage Cycle," which has got 12 chapters in, and at the end of each chapter, there's an exercise for you to kind of like work through. So you can work through each chapter to help break through the self-sabotage. But also, if you've got one specific thing that you'd like to work on, like for instance, one of the chapters is all about forgiveness, which a lot of my clients suffer with because of the shame and the guilt from their family, you can actually work on a chapter all on its own as well. So yeah, and the other book is called The Unseen Wounds of Women, and it's a collaboration of 14 women that got together and wrote a book, actually 15 women that got together and all wrote a chapter each about how they've overcome like narcissistic abuse, domestic violence, or trauma in some way, shape, or form. So yeah, I've got 2 books out that I'm quite excited about, because they are books that can like change people's lives, because there's so many different things in it. And like I said, the book I wrote myself, You Can Have It, I put the story in about the pot roast, which is, and we hadn't even chatted about that before. So it's quite, comical that you actually brought that story up. But it's such a great story to tell, because people get it, because they do think, well, that's because my mum did it that way and my grandma did it that way. And when I say, well, what would you like to do? What way would you like to do it? They kind of like suddenly stop and think, oh, I don't know, I've never thought about that. But okay, and one of the biggest things I say to my clients is get curious. What would you love to do? Why get curious about why you're still doing the things that your mother, your grandmother, your great grandmother did, even if it doesn't kind of really align with you now. And it's really good fun when they realize that, oh, I'd quite like to do that. I wonder if I can do that one. Okay, we'll just try it, see what happens.
Yeah, the light bulb goes off, as you mentioned.
Mm.
And are your books available on Amazon for people to be able to get?
Yeah, the You Can Have It one is available on Amazon, and the Unseen Wounds of Women is available on Lulu. But I will share both the links with you, so you can put it on the thread of the podcast to help people out as well. But yeah, the You Can Have It one is available. If you just type that in on Amazon, type the name, my name, or the title, it will come up in whichever country that you're in.
Okay, super. And you're in the UK, correct?
I am, yes.
And just for the audience, can you spell your name so they have the proper spelling of it?
Yes, it's Brooke, which is Brooke, and then my surname is Bownes, which is Bownes. Very unusual names.
And you had struggled a lot through your life. At one point, you were homeless. You've raised 4 kids. Tell the audience a little bit about your background.
Yeah, like I said, I grew up with a narcissistic mother who constantly told me day in, day out that she hated me, that I didn't even have the audacity to be born properly. She wished I'd have died at birth. It would have been much easier for her, that I would never amount to anything, that nobody would ever love me, and never, ever to tell anybody about my medical issues, because if I did, people would run away from me. And I kept that quiet for years. But now realizing that it was because of how she felt about it, and how she felt the shame and the guilt about it, of like not, producing what she saw as a perfect daughter because of how she feels about herself. So I grew up, criticized, judged, anything I did wasn't right. If anything went wrong, it was always my fault, even if I wasn't there. But she would blame me for it, because with having a narcissist in your life, they don't ever see themselves. They won't ever look internally. Think, oh yeah, maybe that's wrong with me. It's everybody else's fault, and I was the scapegoat. So I really suffered for that. And then I left home at 16, but I did that classic thing of jumping out of the frying pan into the fire, as they say, straight into a narcissistic relationship, because I got love bombed by a young lad. I was only like 15 at the time, and thought, oh, that's, he loves me. He was showing me affection, which I was craving for because I never got that from my mother. Ended up in 2 narcissistic relationships, a bit of a slow learner, but yeah. And I decided that once I want to have children, I thought, well, I need to work on me, because the common sort of denominator in these relationships is me. So it must be something about me. So I thought, if I work on me and become a stronger person, maybe I'll attract different people into my life. And then I had 2 boys. And the kind of real pivotal thing came when I got pregnant with my 3rd child, and I bumped into a friend as I just come out the supermarket, and she said, oh, I didn't realize you was pregnant. I bet you'd love to have a little girl now, which is a natural thing to say because you see somebody with 2 boys. And that was a real heart-stopping moment for me, thinking, no, because what if I have a little girl and I had the same relationship with her that I had with my mother and my mother had with her mother? It's like, I don't, I was happy to have boys, but I didn't want to have a bad relationship with a little girl. But thankfully, I went on to have 2 girls, and we're really, really close. They're like my best friends, thankfully. So I wanted to be that change maker. I wanted to be the generation that stopped the trauma so it didn't carry on going through. And thankfully I have, because my children are now having children, and they are really well-rounded and happy little children. And it's really nice to think that I broke that cycle. That's one of the reasons I wrote the book about how to break through that self-sabotage cycle, because I'm so passionate about it, because I know the effect of generations to come, how that can affect it. But the father of my children, we ended up sort of separating. So I ended up becoming a single mum and bringing my children up single-handed, which was really good fun, because there's only 5.5 years between my 4 children. So it was quite a busy time, but they're amazing. They're in their late 20s and early 30s now, and they're absolutely fantastic. And I've got 8 grandchildren. So it was working on myself, and I've spent years working on my mindset, but it wasn't until I kind of discovered the trauma in the body and how it can get trapped in the body that really made the changes. Because I had such a strong mindset, I would do things, but I would be absolutely petrified doing it. Like, feel that fear and just go through it and do it anyway. Whereas now I've released a lot of that trauma, so I can do things that I want to do without having that heart thumping fear of, am I good enough? Am I going to be okay? And that's one of the things I love to help my clients with. I talk a lot about, my group is actually called the Confidence Community on Facebook. Now, I don't ever say that I will teach you to be 100% confident, but what I will help you to do is feel confident that whatever you go and do, whether it works out as you plan it or it doesn't work out, that you're going to be okay, and you're going to be able to handle the things as they come along the way, because we will release that trauma of you not feeling good enough and not feeling worthy and lovable or important, which are like the 4 main inner child wound cause. So I've spent a lot of time working on me, because I've gone through a lot of experiences, and my clients love it when they come to me and say, oh, I don't quite know how to say this. I'm like, just say it how you want to say it, because we can unpack it and work it out. And I completely get where you're coming from. They say, oh, it probably doesn't make any sense to you. And I'm like, I absolutely understand where you're coming from. And I would like give examples from my life, and like, yeah, that's it. You get it. That's brilliant. So then they start to relax, and then they can start talking, because what happens is when you've got that trauma in your body, if you're trying to talk about something, explain it, you go into that fight flight mode, and you're not thinking from the logical part of your brain. You're actually ready to take action, either to fight or run. So you can't always get all the words out right. And I understand that. So what I do is help them to relax and feel relaxed in their body, so they can actually start to think from the logical part of their brain and say what they want to say.
So you were talking about your relationship with your mother and how difficult it was, and then you didn't want to transfer that to your children, so you worked on yourself. And you're also remarried and happily married now, correct?
I am, yes. We've been together 12 years, and we've got married just over 4 years ago. And yes, now I've worked on me. I attracted somebody completely different. So it was a whole different experience for me as well. And it's absolutely amazing. We've got a wonderful life. We live out in the countryside in a nice 4-bedroom house with our little puppy. We've got a 7-month-old Labrador puppy. Yeah. And life is so different, because I'm not treading on eggshells or sort of being hypervigilant, think, oh my goodness, I can't say that, I can't say that. I can actually be me and say what I want to say. And I'm not a people pleaser anymore. And I was a huge, huge people pleaser once upon a time. And I would self-sabotage everything. If I ever did have, in between the two narcissistic relationships I had, I did actually meet a really nice fellow, but I actually sabotaged that because I thought, oh, this is kind of like the calm before the storm, and I couldn't handle it. So I ended up sabotaging that and ended up that relationship. So, but I then, like I said, started working on me and attracted my husband I have now, and it's amazing. It's lovely. We've been together 12 years, and he makes me laugh every day, and it's great.
That's awesome. It's so nice to hear that. And what you're providing the audience is hope that they can get out of an abusive relationship or a bad relationship, or work on themselves so that they can feel better about themselves and then get into a healthy relationship with another person. So that's great that you provide the hope for people, because you're the example that it can be done.
Absolutely, yeah, because it's one of those things. Thinking, I'm nobody special. I'm just an ordinary girl that decided that I wanted to create my own life and to do something about it. So I started off reading self-development books, and I've gone on to do different courses and have coaches and therapists to work through all the stuff that I needed to work through. Even though I resisted that for years, I had people saying to me, "You should probably have some therapy." In England, it wasn't a thing to have therapy when I was younger. Like, no, I'm not kind of like crazy. We don't have therapy. I know over in the US, it's more of a natural thing to have, but it's still not, a thing that's kind of like common over in England. But I resisted it for years because my feeling was, I'm surviving now as I am, and whatever I've blocked out can stay blocked out, and that's fine. I don't want to bring it up because I don't know how I will feel or how I will cope with it. But it got to the stage where it's like, okay, well, I want to thrive rather than survive. So I need to deal with all this stuff in order to thrive rather than survive. So I started slowly but surely sort of unpacking it and working through it all. And yeah, it did get messy. And because as a child, I was never allowed to cry, because when my mother was being physically abusive, we grew up on a farm. And if my dad happened to come down from the farm for a drink or go to the toilet, wherever, and she wasn't expecting him, she's like, "Stop crying. I'll give you something to cry for even more when your dad goes back to work." So I learned not to cry. But when I started having therapy, it was like a tsunami. It's like a snot fest, to put it bluntly. Like the tears came, and it was really, really messy. And I felt drained going through it. But afterwards, it felt like a whole world had been lifted off my shoulders. And I felt so much lighter, had more energy. I was so much happier, and I actually sort of enjoyed living life rather than just, okay, I'm going to survive today. I'm going to survive through today. I actually started to thrive. And now I've got, obviously my own very successful coaching and therapy business, and I help clients all over the world, which is fantastic.
Do you find that a lot of people, when they're going through their issues, will turn to food for comfort or to relieve stress because of
Oh,
some of the
absolutely.
issues from the trauma experienced by their mother?
Absolutely, because I don't know if you know much about parts therapy, but I talk a lot about parts therapy. Like, we've got our true self, we've got our inner child, and then we've got protective parts that come up to protect us. So like when we want to do something and our nervous system is triggered and our inner child doesn't feel safe, these protective parts will come in to actually protect the inner child, who, that's like the trauma from like when they were 6 or 7. And that could be emotional eating, because it's that hit of dopamine, that comfort food of eating, thinking, okay, well, and it's a distraction as well, because the protective part has really good intentions, even though it's more painful. So like if a person wants to lose weight for their health, and they know it's not really good to eat that cake or eat whatever isn't good for them, even though that's more painful to them to be putting on that weight, it's less painful than actually feeling that pain of feeling not good enough or not lovable or not worthy or not important. And those protective parts will do anything to protect you and to keep you safe. It's like, okay, well, they've gone for that cake and they feel okay for the minute. Okay, tick, job done. So there's all sorts of protective parts that can come up, like emotional eating, self-sabotage, procrastination, perfectionism. And as you probably know, when somebody wants to eat something, whatever it is, it's okay as long as you're eating it mindfully. But if you're grabbing something and kind of like inhaling it just to kind of make yourself feel good, then that's not a good way to be eating your food.
Yeah, exactly. I deal with that with a lot of people that will turn to food for comfort. And a lot of times, like you said, they'll self sabotage. And sometimes they feel more comfortable being overweight because it's a self fulfilling prophecy of, I told you so, you're not worthy. And therefore, they feel that if they're overweight, they're not worthy. And so they keep doing that to themselves instead of breaking the cycle, as you indicated.
Yeah, and also as well, when people are bigger, they feel like they'll get less attention, so they're not being seen as much because often when people lose weight, people come, oh my goodness, you look amazing, that's great, blah blah blah. But people, if they've got trauma stuck in their bodies, they don't want that kind of attention because to be seen could be quite dangerous because especially I deal with like midlife women and midlife women grew up with children should be really quiet and just sit quietly and behave themselves and not be seen and not say anything out loud. So to be seen as a child would have been quite dangerous. To speak out and to say something, you could ended up getting into trouble, whether it's verbally or physically. And that trauma is still stuck in the body when you're in your midlife. So to actually be seen, your body's thinking, no, danger, danger. I'm not going to do that. I want to be safe and hid away. So I'll just hide behind being a big person and then I'll be safe.
Exactly.
My
That's
nervous
why,
system can relax.
yeah, that's why, the mindset and mind issues and emotional and psychological issues are so important and critical to obtaining, good health and wellness for overall health. So that's very important. I'm glad you brought that up. Were there any books or authors that influenced you when you were going through your journey?
Jim Rohn was a big influence on me when I was working through my mindset, and Mate Gabor as well, and think of his name now, von der Beck as well, who wrote The Body Keeps the Score. He was a big influence on me because it's understanding what's going on with your body, because I spent years, like I said, working on my mindset, didn't realize I needed to work somatically in my body as well, because that's where the trauma is stored. I could do anything and had that mindset, well, I'll just push through it and just do it. But my body was like in a right state doing it. It was like my heart would be pounding, my palms would be sweaty, but I would still do it anyway, and like, oh, after, my goodness, I've got through that. Whereas now I actually enjoy doing the things I do, even if I've never done them before. I think, okay, well, we'll just discover, we'll have a play, we'll experiment, see what happens and what's going on. So yeah, the Body Keeps a Score is a great one to read. And Jim Rohn for like the mindset, and Zig Ziglar as well, because that's where I started with my personal development, with Zig Ziglar and Jim Rohn. They're two sort of like great motivational speakers. So and also as well a book called Narcissistic Mothers. I can't remember the author, the title, but that's a really, really good book to read if you kind of think, oh, maybe after this is this, maybe that's the thing, my mother's a narcissist, maybe that's why she's the way she is. And if you read that book, it'll help you to understand why your mother's like your mother, and why she does the things that she does. Because narcissistic people aren't born that way. It's because they've had a really traumatic childhood and something inside them sort of just kind of like switches. But their wounds are so much deeper than like you and I, who would reach out for help. They will see that, okay, there's nothing wrong with me. They will just blank it out completely and blame everybody else because they think that they're perfect. But in fact, narcissistic people are the most scared, insecure people that are on the planet as regards to like trauma and stuff. But they will never admit that and go for that help.
Have you read the book The Traveler's Gift by Andy Andrews?
No, I haven't. No.
That's one of my favorite books, and for me, it was life changing. So I always recommend that to the audience. It's a very short, quick read. I finished it in about 3 hours, but I like that book a lot. It delves into a lot of issues of taking responsibility and accountability for ourselves, so that we don't blame others for situations that we get ourselves into.
That sounds really good. I'll have to have a look at that one, research that one. Thank you.
Where can the audience reach out to you if they want to connect with you and get some guidance from you, or just, learn more about what you do to help people?
They can connect with me at email, and my email is brooke@brookebownes.com. And they can also come and join my Facebook community, which is called the Confidence Community. Be confident to be you, be seen, heard, and have fun. I'm also on Instagram and LinkedIn, and I've just started recently on TikTok. So if you just put Brooke Bownes in, I don't think that I've never met another Brooke Bownes anyway, because it's quite an unusual name. So you can, but I can send you all the links so you can add them to the podcast.
Sure.
If anybody does email me, I do answer all my emails personally as well. So if anybody would like a complimentary 30-minute call with me to help find out where their issues are coming from, I'm happy to do that as well for people.
Okay, I'll make sure that that's added to the show notes for people to reach out and get the free 30-minute consultation. Fabulous, that's very generous of you to offer that. Thank you. As one piece of advice before we end the interview, what could you tell the audience is one piece of advice to give them?
That they are enough, and being you just as you are is good enough, because so many people have grown up thinking they have to be somebody else to be loved or to feel important, but they don't. And I believe that everybody's a diamond, and underneath, that diamond is buried underneath like beliefs and stories from other people that is just buried. But once we release those stories and those beliefs, you can shine like a diamond however you want to shine. To me, it's like coming on podcasts and sharing and raising awareness of the mother wound and trauma. But you may not want to shine that, mate. You may just want to shine in your own family or at work, or just be heard. So it's like, just be yourself and just shine just as you are, because you are good enough just as you are. And once you start to think about that and realize that, you can relax more and just be who you are, because when you be who you are, people will love you for just who you are, because you are an amazing person.
Awesome advice. Thank you so much, Brooke. I really appreciate your being a guest on Stop Dieting podcast today.
Thank you for having me. Take care.
Thanks for listening to the Stop Dieting podcast. Remember to like and subscribe so you won't miss a single episode to get more healthy eating and lifestyle tips. Motivate and inspire others to be healthy by sharing with your friends.